the Forged and Unbroken podcast.
Yeah, the first thing, kind of getting into this, would be you have your fingerprints all over the place when it comes to philosophy and theology and leadership, and that's how we got to know each other. You know, you were a professor at Johns Hopkins for organizational leadership and public safety. So I guess if you could, you've got, and this is something I've always appreciated of you. You very rarely talk about your resume, and not that I want you to give me the rap sheet or your street cred, but if you could, like you have a lot of interest and you have a pretty neat background. So if you could just give us the breakdown on that.
Okay. I've been teaching philosophy for 45 years now and theology for 33 years. I began teaching full-time at a little college called Villa Julie in Baltimore, which now is called Stevenson University. And then I taught there for 12 years full-time, moved over to College of Notre Dame of Maryland for 12 years, which is now the Notre Dame of Maryland University or something like that. So they become big after I leave. I moved over to Hopkins full-time in 2004, but I had been there part-time since 1994. And always at Hopkins up until 2019, it was in what was called variously the Division of Public Safety Leadership or the Police Executive Leadership Program. In 1994, it was all about cops and leadership. In time, it opened up to all the public safety companies and organizations. And we never presumed to teach the craft of firefighting or policing. And so eventually word got out about our leadership education. And so in our last few years in the Division of Public Safety, we attracted people who weren't even in public safety, even though all of our examples were public safety examples and what have you. In 2019, that division closed, and the School of Arts and Sciences came courting and asked if we would bring our masters in organizational leadership and our masters in intelligence analysis over to that school. And so the two vestiges of the old program, Kevin Cross and I, went over to advanced academic programs in the School of Arts and Sciences and brought those two programs with us, but opening them up now so they were no longer limited to public safety. At the start, I was the director of organizational leadership. Kevin was the director of intelligence analysis, but Kevin got his doctorate in organizational leadership, and so it made sense for him to become the director. And so I stepped down to associate director, and have stayed in that position happily. I became a priest, and I was ordained a priest in 2013, and so that's become a second vocation for me. That started when I began teaching at St. Mary's Seminary part-time in 1992, and found myself more and more drawn to religious life, both because of my work at the seminary and my work at College of Notre Dame of Maryland. And although the people who were drawing me primarily were Roman Catholic, I'm Episcopal. So I find that the neat thing about being Episcopal is I can be Protestant when I want to and Catholic when I want to. And my primary interest, I think, in very broad terms, has always been what's referred to as public philosophy. It's what Socrates did in the marketplace in Athens. Right? Socrates was not a formal teacher. If he had a formal job description, it was as a stonecutter, but he probably never actually practiced it. And I've always been attracted to this idea of keeping philosophy in the marketplace rather than up in the ivory tower, where philosophers just talk to each other in jargon that almost nobody can decipher. So when Shelley Greenberg invited me to come over to Hopkins and work with at the time it was just police, I was delighted, because here was a chance to bring philosophy to police and to see whether that actually made any difference. Now, of course, the primary branch of philosophy was ethics, but we also talked about epistemology, which has to do with knowledge. We talked about logic. We talked about metaphysics, reality, for example, because there are a lot of moral questions that ultimately presume a certain view of reality. Abortion's a good example. So one of the debates, one of the underlying metaphysical questions in the debate about abortion is the status of the unborn. Are you a human being from the beginning, or do you only become a human being somewhere down the line, and that kind of thing? So I was able, under the guise of ethics, to bring in other kinds of philosophies. And I must say, I've always had a fondness for police, all public safety. But I was delighted to discover, first in the police and then in the firefighters, their sense of calling, number one. I found very early on there was a big difference between those who enter the profession because they have a calling to it, and those who enter it because it seemed like a good job, as good a job as any. And the ones who enter it because they feel called to it thrive much better.
Yeah.
And I still do a lot of consulting for police primarily. And I find that's still the case, although the old timers are lamenting the fact that they don't recruit that way anymore. They don't recruit to the dignity of the profession. They now recruit promising a good salary and
benefits,
uniform, and and so they feel like at times they're attracting the wrong people. Wrong in the sense that those people don't have a calling to it. And I'm keen on that idea. I think everybody has talents and experience that brings a calling with them.
Yeah.
And if they have the chance to answer the call, they're happier. The community's better off. So I wish we were better about that. We used to be pretty good about it, but now we push getting a job. And so there are people, for example, who have a call to be salespeople, or a calling to be business people. Great. Or a call to be an attorney, or a call to be a tech person. But the ones who go into it because they can't figure out any other way to make money, they just don't seem as happy. So that's been a part of my public philosophy push, is this idea of bringing the way Socrates did philosophy into the marketplace and see whether people can benefit from that exercise.
Yeah, no, I love that distinction. And something I also appreciated learning from you was the conversations that we would have, because you would have us, I mean, there would be steam coming out of our ears by the end of it, because you create so much nuance around these really deep-seated questions, where like at face value you say one thing, but then once we really start pulling back the layers, like we had to think on so many other levels. We had to think so much more critically about it. And I mean, it was a fantastic exercise in some deep thinking, and conversations that always stuck with me. And I mean, there are obviously some things I want to dig in on, but something that you just mentioned was this life of service, right? So I think it's pretty well researched that people that either have professions or volunteer work that serve others are some of the happiest people in the world. They have some of the best longevity behind them on a physical level, physical and mental well-being. And in our profession now, when I first got hired, I had to go up against thousands of applicants, whereas now we're scrambling to get maybe a few hundred. And it is very much drawn to the benefits and pensions and salaries and leave, and that's a component of it, and I'm grateful for that. But just as you said, we have noticed that switch. So if you could really quickly just dig in on a life of service, providing value, and how paramount that is to public service.
Yeah, I think just in very broad terms, we can be servants in just about anything we do.
Yeah.
Right. And perhaps one of the big differences in this distinction you and I are discussing has to do with the role of money. So if you're entering this because of a professional calling, money is a means to practice your profession. Right? If you're entering it merely as a job, then money becomes sort of the metric by how well you did your job. And that's a big difference.
Yeah.
So Shelley Greenberg, I'm sorry, one of my cats wants to play. Shelley Greenberg, for example, tells the story when he entered, he always wanted to be a cop. And when he entered the academy, which I was 1970 or something, the very first day, a woman came in with applications for food stamps, and it had never occurred to him that they'd be making so little that they could qualify for food stamps.
I remember that.
Yeah, he did it just, and I think it's that sense of service, whatever you choose. Now, of course, on the other end of that choice is the potential impact, right? So there may be someone who feels a calling to be a barista at Starbucks. God bless her, and we need that. We need people at Starbucks. The impact of her work isn't going to be tremendous. She probably won't be involved too often in questions of constitutional rights or life and death situations. So the impact makes a difference too, and one ought to call that out. But I would start with this idea, and now you're going to hear the priest in me, that everybody matters. Everybody has dignity. From a purely religious point of view, I believe that from God's perspective, nobody is better than anybody else. It's also the case, I only discovered this recently, and the data seem pretty convincing, that the chance of you being born is 1 in 400 trillion. Right? Now consider that winning the Powerball is something like 1 in 2.9 billion or something. So the chance of you being born is pretty much nil.
Yeah.
And you start with the single cell life forms, say 4 billion years ago or whenever that started. Somehow they had to reproduce, and their progeny had to be able to reproduce, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then you can come all the way to the front. And I think back on my life, I mean, the potential of my not being here. My Italian grandfather was in World War I and almost died 3 or 4 times. I mean, the chance of you being here is so remote. So why shouldn't we be treating everybody as a miracle? Well, because we're so used to each other. That's why. We think of miracles as unusual. But there's a line, and I've Googled it, and I can't find anybody who's put it this way specifically, but I'm sure I'm quoting. I didn't come up with this myself. If God did once in a while what God does routinely, we'd see the miracle in it. Mm-hmm. So you think about the Big Bang, what is it, 13.5 billion years ago, and here's this profusion of hydrogen and helium atoms, and 13.5 billion years later, here are you and I discussing things and getting jokes and wondering, and that's pretty cool. And if you were suddenly atomized, you'd be reduced to quarks and electrons, which is the very same stuff your jacket's made of and the microphone's made of, and that stuff just amazes me. So if we could walk out our door every day ready to think of everybody as a miracle, and hoping that by the end of the day we have honored that understanding, I think we'd be a heck of a lot better off. And I think there are people who are like that, even baristas and business people and salespeople. They just have that sense of the value of the other person that goes beyond how much money can I get from them, in our transaction. So I don't know if that fully answers your question. I think I've sort of wandered off, but and in that sense, everybody can be a minister too. They often talk about ordained people as ministers, but I think I think what you do, in terms of the work you've done professionally, is a ministry. I think the cops are ministers because they're serving others, right?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and I appreciate how we can the philosophy and leadership and the theology can all collide together, right? These aren't separate pieces, and we are these whole human beings that have so many experiences all drawn in together. This is not just a singular thing. These are cross sections of all of our thoughts and beliefs and feelings, and anybody can serve. And man, we're 10 minutes in. You're going to get me misty-eyed here, which is great. The something we really dug in on was like the decision-making process, right? And how we maintain integrity and the distinctions between morals and ethics, and something that and I remember that really rang with me. And bringing in some theology, right? There's one of the original Revolutionary War battle flags was the Appeal to Heaven flag. And the symbolism behind like the pine tree was like the purity, but also, they're long and straight for all the masts for the warships. But the Appeal to Heaven was this notion of there is policy and law, and it is written by man, and we, in all of our mess, can be flawed, and that there will always be a time when there is a moral higher ground that we have to decide upon that goes above and beyond what a written policy states. And if you take, and now that was in a much more godly format in the 16 and 1700s, the higher power being the, God versus policy written by man. A modern take on that is just any moral decision. What is the moral superiority? Like, where's the high ground here? Maybe superiority is too rich of a word, but that happens so often just in everyday life, but absolutely in public safety. So I would love if you kind of dug in on this. Like, there will be a time and a place where we have to break policy. And I remember you asked us some hard questions for this very topic. How do we trust ourselves? How do we act under our own volition to take the higher ground when it flies in the face of something that is written? And this isn't something that we can do. This is something I argue is that you can't be an antagonist all the time, right? There's a time and a place for it. So how can people, one, recognize the differences, and two, how can they trust themselves to actually make that right decision when it flies in the face of policy or groupthink or whatever else? So there's a wide cast net, but I'll let you go.
That's a cool question. So I begin when I have my one day sessions with the police, and lately it's just been the California Post, but I've been working with them since about 2009. I go out twice a year, talk to them. And for a long time, it was the Senior Management Institute in Police up in Boston, and then it was the Florida Department of Law Enforcement folks. And every so often, a single agency will ask me to come in. Kansas City had me come in a few years ago. I got to hold the Tommy gun that had been used, and it was a whole separate point. I always begin by saying a leader knows when to break a rule, number one, because sometimes the rule itself is wrong, right? It can be wrong because it tells you to do something that's morally wrong. You think of Jim Crow law in the American South, or Hitler's law, or something like that. Mm-hmm. It can be wrong because, well, generally it's a good thing. In this case, it's not. A generally good rule is you should return what you borrow. Well, if you've borrowed a gun of mine for target practice and I come rushing over an hour later in a jealous rage and say, give me my gun back, I've got to shoot my unfaithful wife. You don't say, well, the rule is you return what you borrow. And then, of course, there are many times, and I suspect most rules have happened only after the fact, right? That something came up and there was no rule. And, we got to have a rule for that. So I got an example once from a sheriff in Florida where one night he was driving home and saw one of his deputies who was on duty towing a boat. And he pulled him over and he said, what are you towing the boat for? And the deputy said, oh, no, I'm on my supper break. I'm doing this on my time. And the sheriff said, no, you can't use one of our cars to tow a boat. And the deputy said, I never saw that rule. Well, there wasn't a rule that said that specifically. So the next day there was a general order, right, that said specifically, thou shalt not tow a boat. So the first thing I say is leader knows when to break a rule. Second thing I say is, unless you're a sociopath or a psychopath, you already have the moral equipment. And 99 times out of 100, you're going to know the right thing to do. And so the difference really becomes a difference between being ethical, which most people can be if they choose to be, and studying ethics. And the advantage of studying ethics is it identifies tools that are available when you hit a moral brick wall, when for all of your wisdom and experience, you're just not sure what to do next. It also gives you a vocabulary to explain why you did what you did. Because in many cases, when I've been consulted, because of a disagreement between two parties, and the one party defense is, well, it was the right thing to do. And the other party is saying, well, I don't see that. But the first party doesn't have a vocabulary to explain why it was the right thing. It was just a hunch. And we dig into it, and sure enough, it was the right thing to do, and here's why. So the first thing to say is leader knows when to break a rule. The second thing to say is the assumption is you're already ethical. And so the question is, how do we bring that out better so that you can put your moral wisdom to good use in the tough cases? And that was part of Socrates' point, is everybody's a philosopher. The second you began to wonder, you became a philosopher. And everybody's a theologian. Whether you believe in God or not, you have beliefs about God. That makes you a theologian. But there's the difference between doing it and studying it. So now in the study of it, the next thing I would suggest is, and as you know, I think Aristotle's the man, that we have an inclination to find that sweet spot between not doing enough and doing too much, right? And of course, history's come to call that the golden mean. I don't think Aristotle ever used the term golden. He referred to this as a mean. Now, in the old days, the thinking was that sweet spot represented true north on a moral compass. And that analogy is understandable because Aristotle himself talked about the archer. And so an excellent archer can routinely aim and hit that bullseye over and over again. And Aristotle felt it was the same with virtue, that a virtuous person was somebody who was in the habit of knowing the good and doing the good. But since then, I've come across a few papers that I really like that suggest that what Aristotle was looking for was equilibrium. It wasn't merely there was a deficiency and an extreme that had to be resolved. It was all kinds of stuff flying around, all kinds of stakeholders and options and short and long-term consequences. And so I've come to talk about the moral gyroscope. So I've set aside the moral compass as a mechanical metaphor and replaced it with the moral gyroscope. And I would insist that as long as you have a moral conscience, you have that gyroscope. Now, my hunch is we're born with it. And for many of us, we find God to be a useful place to land when we're just wondering about this gyroscope of ours. But I also think it's given to us by nature, and it's not limited to moral problems. In life, this gyroscope's constantly operating. So when you step into a shower, it might be too cold. Okay, well, you make it a little warmer. You get into your car and the radio is blowing out your eardrums. Well, you turn the volume down. And a sub lesson in that is often a very big problem actually has a very simple solution. So the radio is blowing out your eardrums. Well, you don't replace the radio with a new system, or you don't sell the car and buy a new one for a better radio. You just turn the volume down a quarter of a turn. So we've already got that mechanism in us, that gyroscope that's constantly looking for the balance between too little and too much. And I think that applies in ethics for sure, but also sort of across the board. So I think that series of comments put together puts philosophy and theology kind of in the center of almost any moral discussion. And again, nobody's coming to that conversation a blank slate. The fact that you're alive and talking to me now tells me that you've had many, many moral challenges and you've met them, and whether you studied ethics or not. And so you're well equipped. And so our task academically or in the practice of our religion is to tease that out even more and begin to identify key tools that are available for us should we be stumbling or should we hit that brick wall.
Yeah. So you're suggesting that we're not this tabula rasa, we're not this blank slate. We are we are inherently good. And where then do we go awry? Is it based on majority rule? Is it based on groupthink? Is it based on a bad example? And how do we fight that?
I think well, let's see, how am I going to put this? St. Augustine said there are two kinds of sin. There's sin of ignorance and sin of weakness. And incidentally, Socrates disagreed. Socrates said it's always a sin of ignorance. Socrates said we never knowingly do wrong. And Augustine said that's not true. Sometimes we know it's wrong, but we do it anyway. Well, that would take you 5 podcasts to work through. So I'll set that point aside. But I do think those are the two elements to look at for why we fall short. Sometimes we just don't have the strength to pursue what we know we should pursue. And other times we're ignorant in ways we're responsible for. We shouldn't be. And there's a difference between ignorance and not knowing. Ignorance means you think you know, but you don't, right? And so an example of ignorance for me that gets my goat is the person who will quote the Constitution almost as a billy club, only to reveal that this person has no idea what he's talking about. He's not even quoting the Constitution, right? Well, the Constitution says, no, it doesn't. Right? This idea, for example, there's nothing in the Constitution about God. The only two comments are there'll be no religious test for office, and the government won't get in the business of religion. That's the First Amendment, right? That's it. So when people talk about their God-given constitutional rights, if I weren't a pacifist, I'd want to slap them silly. And so that's a sin of ignorance. They should know better. If they're gonna bother to quote the Constitution, then for God's sakes, read the thing. Right? Same with the Bible. Oh my goodness, the way people abuse the Bible, and so there's the weakness, and it's first cousin laziness, right? It's a lot easier for me to land on an authority I respect and then just do whatever the authority says, than to go out and check this for myself. And it's I don't know if you experienced this growing up, but I can remember as a teen having many moments of disappointment to discover that people I once thought were pretty much perfect had gotten it wrong.
Sure.
And I thought, oh my goodness, if they've got it wrong, what hope is there for me? So I think those are the two ways we sin. And I'm using that word very broadly, not just in a religious sense, but we don't take the time to do what we know we should do. That's a sin of weakness, or we should have known better. Now, one example for me that I struggle with all the time, because right now I'm in New York, right? I have a church in New York. This gig is ending on June 30th. I've had it for 2.5 years.
Wow.
Every day I walk past people that could use my help, and there are too many of them.
Yeah.
And so I always feel badly. I try at least to acknowledge that they're there, but it's more than I have the strength to do.
Sure.
And the next step in this is, I think sometimes we just have to settle for the lesser of two evils. Always we want to be able to do the right thing, but sometimes we're in a position where whatever we do next is going to be wrong. So choose to do the lesser of the two evils. But that takes wisdom, and wisdom takes conversation. I don't think any of us is born wise. I think wisdom comes from the community. And within the community. And so one hopes that you're in the right community so that you're not actually promoting stupidity. So I think there's just something human in us that inclines toward the lazy or the expedient. And I understand that because I'm guilty of it myself.
Yeah, I certainly see that in our profession, and yeah, we're all guilty of it. I certainly have my days as well. Something you talked about, the lesser of two evils. I really enjoyed our discussions surrounding, and in your book, Ethics in Criminal Justice, the just war theory, and how, and man, it really got us thinking about how, you being a pacifist, we obviously don't want war. We don't search for that. But there are times when you have to go to battle because that is the lesser of two evils. And maybe it takes, and I use this loosely, maybe it does take the moral high ground. And that's just a macro lesson for a lot of micro decision-making that we have in life, whether that's personal decision-making in the home, or that is out on the street being a leader in the fire service, like leading a company of men and women, right? Yeah, and something else you mentioned is I love that you must know the rules to be able to break them. I think there's also some things that you drove us to that is to understand the intent, right? So a lot of people take whatever the rule or the policy, and even in the Bible, they take something at face value, And you challenge us to be like, well, hold on, let's look at the historical perspective on this. Let's look at the intent of where this came from, so we have a deeper understanding. And now we can have that intelligent discussion back and forth and a healthy debate about, does this still apply? Does this still hold ground? Because if we take it from a modern sense and just the lines on the piece of paper, like, there is so much more nuance to that. And I think it also allows you to create more wisdom and experience around the argument. And then you can decide whether or not, okay, do we need to break this? Do we need to change it? Or has it stood the test of time and like, no, they had it right. Right. And that is, that can be a hard exercise.
I agree. And one of the things that arms us for that exercise well is what I refer to as epistemological humility. I'm probably dropped that in your class once or twice, and I'm pretty evangelical about this. Now, it's not skepticism, because the skeptic says you can't know, and you say to the skeptic, well, how do you know that? I mean, it's sort of contradictory. But the epistemologically humble says, oh, geez, I don't know as much as I thought I did, and I find that as I get older, I get dumber. I know this sounds like double talk, but I don't mean that. And I love it. I mean, the older I get and the more I realize how much I don't know yet, I get excited about it. I think, oh, cool. I want to dig into that. I want to read about that. I want to discover this. Just learned about epigenetics about a year ago. Never even heard the word before. And now I can't get enough. I can't claim to be an expert in it by any means, but I love the whole idea of epigenetics. That's just cool stuff. Yeah. Quantum physics, man, that stuff is cool. So if we can enter the conversation admitting a level of epistemological humility, where I say to you, until somebody convinces me otherwise, this is what I believe, but I'm open. Let me hear your side. And then invariably, if you've done any homework at all, you're going to teach me something. Mm-hmm. And it may change my mind, or it may not. It may strengthen my resolve once I heard your position. Mm-hmm. But you mentioned that whole idea of decision making, right? That decision making really comes in at least three parts. And sometimes we don't treat all three parts equally. The first part is the decision itself, the judgment, the conclusion. The second part is the set of premises for that conclusion. And then the third part is how well the premises support the conclusion, right? So if I say abortion is morally wrong, and my premise is because it's the taking of a person's life, and I come back and then somebody says, well, what if the abortion occurs, say, in the first month of pregnancy? Oh, no, that's taking a person's life. And I said, well, is it true that you're a person from conception? Now we're into theology. Now we're into philosophy. Now we're into problems of definition. Yeah, I had a colleague who was a Roman Catholic who was very devout in her practice, but she said, there's a problem with that argument because you can freeze embryos and bring them back to life. You can't do that with persons. And so in her philosophical view, abortion early on in the pregnancy was not the taking of a person's life. So the point is, the place to start is, what are we talking about? What are we debating here? Are we really debating the ethics of abortion, or are we debating the moral status of the unborn? And then the next question is, okay, what are your premises for your position? And I'm going to take a look at them, and I'm going to ask, well, are your premises true? And if they're true, do they necessarily prove what you're trying to prove? It might be true, for example, that the Pope said abortion's wrong. Well, is that enough proof that it is wrong? Because it's true. Pope said that. But I'm Episcopal. I don't recognize the authority of the Pope, although I think Pope Francis and this new Pope are pretty cool people. I would not draw my conclusions about the morality of abortion on the basis of on the basis of the fact that the Pope said that. Right? That's So just because it's true doesn't mean your conclusion is logically justified. So there again, I think we have the equipment for that kind of decision making. And we use it all the time, right? The fact that you're alive proves to me that many, many times you've made quick logical decisions. If I do this, I will get hit by a car, so I won't do that. All right, that's logic. So in addition to this moral gyroscope that's constantly spinning. There's a logic machine in us, assuming that we have all of our faculties. And what philosophy can do is help you identify it and strengthen it. And
yeah. Something with and I remember I did some writing on this a little while ago, and I just quickly looked it up to make sure I had it correct, but it was Socrates and his triple filter test. And he has three questions: is it true, is it good, and is it useful? And that was his layers of how to, whether it was gossip. And I think that's actually how he's created it. Somebody came to him and was like, hey, did you hear about this guy doing this thing? And it's like, hold on, before I, sink my teeth into the juicy gossip, is this conversation going to provide any value? And that was his filter. His triple filter was, is it true? Is it good? Is it useful? And that's kind of like, I think maybe more of a ballpark or more generic take on probably what you just said. And it just takes, I think with anything, yes, sometimes this is a split second conversation or thought process you need to have in your head. And other times it takes a lot of work. And I think that's where maybe people drop off, is the energy required, the efforting that's required for some of the decisions we have to make in life, is where people drop off and then, take the, as you mentioned earlier with Augustine, maybe more of a weak route.
And I think you can be trained to be better at it, very similar to the way cops are trained to use their firearms, right? So if they have proper training, when the time comes that they might really need to use it, it's a lickety split decision. They don't have to go through some long algorithm. They don't sit back and go, should I or shouldn't I? Because there's no time for that. No. Whereas I would, because I'm not trained. I mean, I used to target practice a lot, and I enjoyed that, but I'm not trained to use a firearm in self-defense. God forbid. So I would pause, right? If a gun were available, and suddenly, again, God forbid, there's a situation where the use of a gun would be justified, it wouldn't be instant for me.
Sure.
But somebody who's trained, one hopes that at that moment, it's split second. And I think you can do that with logic. I think you can do that with moral reasoning. If you study it and train for it, then when the time comes to put it to use, and again, 9 times out of 10, it's a no-brainer. So you don't need to have trained. But in those moments where it's difficult, people who have trained for this are going to be much better at it. And did you ever read Malcolm Gladwell's book, Blink?
No, actually I have it sitting on, I read his, I just finished Range, and I actually have Blink on my book stand right behind me. It's in the queue.
It's worth it. So there's a story he tells that I think would be true to your heart, where a group of firefighters are in a living room training their water on a fire in the kitchen, which is the next room over. But the water doesn't seem to be doing any good. The flames don't seem to be getting lower. And all of a sudden, the person in charge of that crew, I think it was Lieutenant, said, "Run!" And so they all rush out of the house, and the floor they'd been standing on collapsed. And it turned out the fire was coming from the basement and sort of being drawn up into the kitchen. Yeah. Well, if the lieutenant, and this was the lieutenant's training, just kicked in, right? So one might think, what a great instinct. But the lieutenant would say, well, yeah, it might have been instinct now, but it came from all the experience I had and all the training I've done. So that others might stand there and go, gee, I wonder why the fire's not going out. Pow, the floor collapses and there they go. So what Gladwell is saying is you can actually learn to make those snap decisions. And that's an interesting point. So it seems intuitive to an external observer, but it's really an intuition that's based on a lot of stuff.
Yeah. That gets my mind on fire. So it's experience, but more so than experience, there's also expertise wrapped up in it. And I think a lot of people use it interchangeably. And I would argue they're two separate things. Sometimes we use experience as a word or a synonym for time on in our profession. And
I see. Yeah.
Yeah. And expertise, I would argue, is the actual skills and abilities and knowledge wrapped up with the experience. So sometimes it can be synonymous, but oftentimes they are not. And we have to be careful with that differentiation. And something, we talked about earlier before we started recording is like the Mayday and survival training that I do a lot of and speak on. And so much of building sets and reps in our training is to make the conscious subconscious. So it is intuitive. And a good friend of mine, Sammy Hiddle, and I beat up this quote all the time, but he says you can skip steps physically, but you cannot skip steps mentally. So I think using that example is we have built up the skill set to make the conscious now subconscious. So that decision-making process is quick and expedient, but it's still based on the knowledge, skills, and abilities and experience that you have wrapped up over the tenure of your profession, right? And that's kind of like a street side or maybe a more literal practical example of what you just mentioned with just decision-making processes in leadership and in life.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. Making the conscious subconscious. I like that.
Yeah.
I'm going to use it. See what I mean about learning every time?
No, I appreciate
you for that.
Yeah. So switching gears a little bit, I think so much of this can be something for modern day living. We'll say post-COVID, a lot of people may struggle with this. I see it with people in retirement, or maybe a second stage in life, or a new vocation, or just even times when we experience hard calls in the fire service, and maybe we experience moral injury, to ourselves, our brothers and sisters, maybe to children, like these moral injury calls that we experience. And they all center back, I think, to purpose and meaning in life, in our profession, finding, like I said, the next vocation in life. And I think a lot of people, one, take it for granted, I think, initially. And then as we age and hopefully get a little bit more wisdom under our belts, then they start to question, well, has my life been in service to the mission of purpose and meaning? Do I have purpose and meaning? Or now that my life of service is now close this chapter and I'm on this next chapter, I have lost my purpose and meaning. So from your standpoint, talking about not just organizational leadership, but personal and individual leadership over ourselves, and wrapping in the theology and philosophy with it, how do we identify it and how do we nurture it, not just within our professions, but just throughout life?
Wow, what a great question. Paul Tillich, who was a philosopher of religion and I think a Lutheran pastor, it doesn't matter what his denomination was, he was also an ordained minister. And up until about in the mid 20th century, he was probably one of the most famous theologians. And eventually, after he died, he became more obscure. But that's sort of beside the point. He had this notion of what he called the ultimate concern. And he argued pretty persuasively that once we become aware of our mortality, at whatever age that is, I think I sort of became aware of it when my dad's mom died, and I can remember my mom trying to explain it to me, and I was only about 3, but that was my sort of first sense of mortality. And we begin to wonder, well, what does that mean for my life then? What's the point of living? And so that becomes the ultimate concern. And according to Tillich, that concern is always percolating in our heads, even if we're in moments where we have to survive. The very fact that we're trying to survive rather than simply giving up suggests that somewhere in the back of our head is this question, well, what's the point? And so what Tillich then invites you to do, of course, it's an academic exercise. This isn't easily done when you're on the street starving, but what Tillich invites you to do is consider all the candidates for the answer to that question. What's the ultimate point? Is it to make money? Is it to make friends? Is it to have a family? Is it to be famous? And then once you've picked a candidate, ask yourself, is that ultimate enough? Do I really believe that everything else I do, I should do for that? Or is there something more? And so for Tillich, it's a lifelong question. And at any given moment, if we can say, I think I'm on the right track, then that's probably enough for the time being, as long as you don't give up, as long as you don't say, well, I'm famous now. Now I can just die. No, what you realize is when you see others and their successes, they're not famous. and they don't even want to be famous. So what do they have that you don't have? Now, Tillich incidentally was Christian, and so his answer was the Christianity does it for him. That what Christianity does is call you to a level of service that remains a useful first principle for your entire lives. But Tillich also was very careful to say, look, I'm not trying to convert you. I'm just telling you where I landed. And incidentally, now we're talking Denmark, Copenhagen. Soren Kierkegaard, right, famous 19th century theologian, said the same thing. He said, look, what life does, and for him, especially the life of the mind, it eventually brings you to an abyss where logic says, well, this is as far as I can take you. I've answered all the questions I can answer, and there's still this abyss. Well, there's more to my life than this. Now what do I do? And Kierkegaard said, well, you either stand there and rub your hands in despair and say, woe is me, or you take the leap. This is the famous leap of faith, right? That phrase that comes from Kierkegaard. And so Kierkegaard chose the Christian leap of faith. But again, he said, look, I'm not trying to convert you. I can't give you a good argument for Christianity. And you can't give me a good argument against it. But so there comes a point where you've got to say, okay, logic got me this far. Now what do I do? And I think Tillich's directive is very helpful. I ask myself, is what I have settled for enough? And if it isn't, what else is there? And try it out. Right? And I do think, and going back to what you said earlier, which I thought was a brilliant observation, finding yourself giving to others, especially in ways that they can appreciate, can really do the trick, right? Yeah. And there's so many ways to do that. They can involve money and stuff, or they can simply involve acknowledgement, right? One thing that used to embarrass me as a kid, although I've since learned to like it, when my dad was approached by some homeless person asking for money, the first thing my dad would do is, "Hi, I'm Frank. What's your name?" And as a kid, I was embarrassed. I would think, "Come on, Dad, just." But with one exception that I can remember, it was always a positive thing where the person's body language would change. It, "Oh, my name's Joe." And my dad would say, "Well, Joe, how did you end up in these circumstances?" And my dad would give them to me. And Joe, "Well, I got to tell you, Frank, I drank too much." And my dad said, "Oh, yeah." And so here he was treating this person as a person, right?
Yeah.
Not as an inconvenience.
Yeah.
And that doesn't cost us much, right?
Yeah.
The other day in New York, a fellow came up to me pretty drunk, and he said, "Man, you're lucky." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Because if you took a piss over there in the corner, people would leave you alone." And I said, "Well, first of all, I don't plan to do that. But secondly, I think they'd notice." "Oh, no, man, they wouldn't know, but they noticed me." And he said, I got to go really badly." He wasn't even asking for anything. He was just saying, how unfortunate he was. So I took out a 10, and I said, "Here," his name was Kent. I asked him, he said, "What's your name?" "I'm Chris." "Kent." I said, "Kent, take this, go over to that Starbucks. You can buy something. You can use the bathroom." He went, oh man, that's just a godsend. I got to have a kiss." I said, "No, you don't have to have a kiss." But it was so simple. Right?
Yeah.
And it was such a simple solution. Now, it's possible if you'd walked a few blocks farther, he could have gone into Bloomingdale's and found the bathroom. But it was so simple. It took me 5 seconds. And frankly, I wish I would do more of that. And I just don't have it in me. But that's what I mean. So if a person reaches a point where they say, I can't think of a good purpose to keep going, I would invite them to go with the Tillich question. Okay, so what is your ultimate concern? What is it you feel you're lacking? Is it fame? Is it love? Is it money? What is it? And I have a congregant who's very poor financially, but she's serving all over New York City, and she loves it. She serves in soup kitchens, and she helps there's really neat senior citizen centers in New York that don't cost a penny, and offer all kinds of stuff. They offer lunch and dinner every day. They offer movies. They offer community. And so she makes it her business to ask these old timers on the street, do you know about this senior center? And if they don't, she gives them the literature, and it's not costing her anything. And so that's sort of my suggestion to someone who feels purposeless. Now, of course, the priest in me would say, why don't you give religion a shot? And if what you tried didn't sit well with you, try something else. I mean, my best friend's Jewish, so I don't think Christianity's cornered the market, but I do think religion can really help, because it gets you up and out of yourself. Like you mentioned, that flag, appeal to heaven.
Yeah.
It sort of it reminds you that there's more to you than you. And I think religion well done does that.
Yeah. Well, here's another rabbit hole. Then this is why I love these conversations. Let's go down this rabbit hole of victim versus ego. And I'll set it up like this. In the fire service, I have experienced line of duty deaths and maydays and, the horrendous things, right?
Sure.
And my experience from that was that there are two avenues to heal from that. And one was being proficient in your skills, so that way there's no question about competency. There was also connection and meaning with yourselves and with others. Whereas the other side of it was people may not have been competent in their skills, and they were left wondering, what if they were somebody who then says, it's not like, hey, this event happened to me, how can I grow from it? It's PTSD versus PTS growth. It is, this event happened to me and I have no control over this. And and some good friends of mine, Wells Wilson and Ben Martin, put it in a more defined sense of, it's this thing in psychology called core self-evaluations. And people with high core self-evaluations generally can get out of these horrible situations. I don't want to say unscathed, but they come out of it with a greater sense of purpose, a greater sense of meaning. They're less risk averse also, is what the research has found, which I think is paramount to what we do. I don't want firefighters, whether you're a recruit or a tenured officer, to be risk averse in high risk situations. I want you to lean into the fight, right? So not even just in public safety, I think it's rampant in public safety, but just in life, how do we combat the ego, the sense of victim status of, this is happening to me, not, okay, this event happened to me, now how do I learn and grow from it? Because I think that's really, really got people in some pretty hard grips right now.
My goodness, you ask good questions. Part of that in the specific profession that you're in seems to me to depend on recruiting. I don't know quite how you recruit for that, but if it were possible to recruit in such a way that you knew you were bringing in people who had the right sense of risk aversion. When I first started working with the Secret Service back in the late 90s, and I was asking for people to tell me problems in the Secret Service, Sloan, who was the special agent in charge in Baltimore at the time, invited me to come down, hang out, and learn some stuff. And he said his greatest problem with recruiting right at the moment, it's like 1999, I guess, 2000, people who were knocking on the door saying, I want to take a bullet for the president. And he would say, no, you don't understand. We want you to train so hard that you'll never have to take a bullet for the president. And if you have to, then you screwed up. You made a mistake.
Yeah.
On the other hand, he wants you to be brave enough to turn into the gunfire if you have to. So sure. See, there's my old Aristotelian again. So somewhere between being a flaming coward and a flaming foolhardy person comes that right spot. So how do you recruit for that? And I don't have an easy answer to it, except I think it's a good question. And I first began to think of that because of Tom Sloan, right? That you want to catch them at the door and figure out whether they've got what it takes to turn toward the gunfire if they have to, but they'd really rather not. Thank you very much. That would be a right person, right? Wow. That said, if I'm going to fall back into my philosophy and theology again, I would also encourage, when the time is right, to have conversations about life and death, right? Because I don't think death, I don't think being dead is bad. Let me say that. I think, as George Carlin used to say, getting dead may suck, but being dead. And now, of course, I don't think it's bad for religious reasons, but even if you just fall asleep and that's it, and you don't ever wake up again, where I get my strength, I guess, to face death, and I really had to do it in earnest for the first time when I did a chaplaincy internship at Johns Hopkins Hospital and was frequently by the side of somebody who was dying or had just died. I go back to the Stoic idea, and I love this idea, that life is like a banquet to which you've been invited through no deserving of your own. And having been invited, there are no guarantees. So the way one of them, I think it's Epictetus, but one of the Stoics puts it this way. So here you are, a being with nothing really going on in what we might call heaven, and you're just there. And a butler shows up and taps you on the shoulder and says, the master would like to invite you to a banquet. Now, before you say yes or no, here are the caveats. You might not like all the food we have. There might not be enough of the food you like. You might not like all the people he invited. And there's no guarantee about how long you get to stay. Would you take the deal? And the Stoic answer is, well, of course. What do I have to lose? So you take the deal. You go to the banquet. Sure enough, some of the food's excellent, some of it isn't. Some of the people are nice, some of them aren't. And then the butler shows up again and says, the master says it's time to go. Do you go kicking and screaming and say, I demand my right to stay longer? Or do you say, thank you for having invited me in the first place? And the first time I had to pull that on myself, oddly enough, was when my Basset Hound puppy was really sick. And it came on suddenly. And there was a very good chance that he might die. He was really not he was 2 years old by now, but he still acted like a puppy. And incidentally, he lived another 9 years. But at this moment, the vets were saying, I got to prepare you. He really might die. We'll do what we can. And I had to do this mind game on myself. And my first thought was, well, that's not fair. He's only been around 2 years, and et cetera, et cetera. And I thought, well, wait a sec. If God had said to me, look, I'm going to give you Barney, but you only get him for 2 years, and then I'm taking him back, would you take the deal? Yes, I would. Same with my children. I can say this academically because my children are in good health. I lose my child and I'll be a basket case maybe forever. But academically, I can say, if God said to me, I'm going to give you Anna, but I'm only giving you Anna for 27 years, and then I'm taking her back, or you don't have to have her at all. I mean, those are your two options. Would you take the deal? Yes, I would.
100%.
Yeah. So if one can begin to think of life and death in those terms, right, that my dad, even though my dad was a Methodist minister, he was more of a Buddhist when it came to these. He loved Buddhism. And somebody once asked him, do you believe in life after death? And my dad said, will you answer this question for me? Where does the flame go when you blow it out? And if you can answer that, then you've got my answer. So I think there's something in us that by nature sees death as an evil. And we can experience it. Obviously, we can experience it directly, in which case that's the end of that. But we can experience it vicariously, and often it comes to somebody we love, and now we feel cheated. Right? But the question is, are they worse off? And I think, generally speaking, the answer is no, because there was no guarantee about how long they were going to get to live anyway.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we're left behind. And I think funerals, for example, are primarily for the people who are still alive.
Absolutely.
And so that's a philosophical, theological answer, is maybe we ought to take the time to rethink the death itself. And maybe if we could rethink it in a way that made us less offended by it, then we wouldn't have the problems that you're talking about, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The only thing we're promised is time, and we're not ever promised how much of it we get, though. And I appreciate that distinction. And it's a similar vein to what you just spoke on. Man, even when you're talking about kids, I started getting a little emotional there, because I certainly feel that. It's Marcus Aurelius in Meditations. And I'm going to butcher the paraphrasing, but in essence, he was saying, like, every night when your head hits the pillow, I want you to metaphorically kill yourself, or think to yourself, like, I'm not going to wake up in the morning. Was my day worth it? Was my justifiable, right? And I have certainly gone through that practice of having two young girls, wanting to be a father and a husband of example. And I do that when my head hits the pillow at night. And I've thought, hey, man, I did not get it right today. And it's gotten emotional. But it's that practice of, okay, today is done. If I have the fortunate opportunity and grace to wake up again tomorrow morning, I now have another 24-hour shot at this. And by waking up in the morning, you're like, hey, I've been given another chance. It is completely within my power and within my journey to now flip the script and correct the wrongs from yesterday or whatever. And it's a bit similar to vein, I think, to what you're saying, just kind of canned slightly differently, still taking a philosophical approach from Marcus Aurelius of, taking the opportunity that you have in this day. I think, you can probably resonate with this, being a father and a husband, the days are long, but the years are brutally short. Right. And I'm certainly feeling that now, getting close to 40 and seeing my girls grow. It's a conversation I have with myself daily. Right.
Yeah. I still frequently, when thinking about my daughters, think about them in their childhood. And one of the things that really comes back a lot is how excited they could be by simple things. So when I would take, especially Anna, my younger one, only because she's newer in my memory as a kid, when we'd go to the grocery store, she, as a toddler, and then maybe even up into say 5, 6, or 7, she absolutely had to have something from the gumball machine, right? Had to. Come on, Dad, please, please, please. And I said, it'll end up in the middle of your bedroom floor in about 10 minutes after we get. No, Dad, I promise. Please, 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 please let me have. All right, here you go. And whatever this little trinket was, she'd be so excited about it. And sure enough, 10 minutes after we got home, it appeared on the middle of her floor. In fact, one time in that same spirit, which I absolutely love and remember fondly, we had gone to Istanbul just for fun. We spent about 10 days there, I think. And she wanted this pair of like genie pants, right? They're very baggy genie pants. And I said, Annie, you will never, ever wear them. Dad, I promise I will. I'll wear them everywhere. I said, please, Dad, please. So on the last day, I said, all right, we'll get you the genie pants. Well, sure enough, I said, are you going to wear them on the plane? Dad, I wouldn't wear these on the plane. So, she never wore them. But what I miss is how excited they could be by something that simple.
Yeah.
I wish I had that in me, that I could be that excited. And I tease Anna and Abby about that. Both of them, I say, hey, could we just go over to the Giant and you buy something from a gumball machine? Dad, just one more time for old time's sake. So there's something there's a certain wisdom, I think, in that, that we often understandably associate wisdom with old age. And I love your point about kinds of experience, not simply time in, but what you've learned. But I think children have a certain kind of wisdom that comes naturally to them, this ability to see a big picture, even if they don't get the details. And so they can get so excited by things. And I find that charming and also, I think, wise in a sense.
Yeah. Well, man, if you just tipped me off on something else. Let's dig in on this now. I certainly remember those times, like I'm rushing to get the kids in the car, and my youngest will look up and be like, Dad, look at the moon. And it just stops you in your tracks. Like, wow, you know what? That is really great. And my youngest, she loves the outdoors, and she will just sit on our back hill just to watch the sunset. And it forces you to kind of realign, just take that second to appreciate what you have going on around you. And I think we get so wrapped up in the pace and the furiousness of our jobs and professions. And I do think, and something I try to argue is, when you are on the job and when you're on shift, give that shift your 100%. Your effort, your competencies, your experience with and for each other. It's not just the leader on down, but everybody has something to offer. So let's give it our all for ourselves, but also the community. But then also, we need to be able to take a step back and decompress and not just for decompression's sake, but I think to help realign and to focus on all these other things that matter in life that sometimes we lose sight on, right? I think in the American lifestyle, that work-life balance can very quickly get hijacked. And it probably goes back to what you're arguing earlier, is that bit of moderation or finding that equilibrium. We don't always do a good job with that, especially in public safety.
Mhm.
So how do we align ourselves in a healthy way to find that equilibrium, not just in retirement, but while we're on the job here currently, to where we can give our all to the profession while we're there, but then we can, on our days off, give it to our families and ourselves, when that is so hard, especially in days of mandatory holdovers and being short-staffed, or people just wanting to work overtime because they need to bring in more money. It's you see that value kind of get hijacked oftentimes.
Sure.
And some of the highest paid people in organizations are generally police and fire, outside of top admin, because of all the overtime hours worked. It's constantly in the news at the end of each fiscal year, right? The top 10 employees, half of them are fire and police, right, or more. So finding that equilibrium is a challenge for many.
And I found in my own life, I think I've finally gotten good with this, but for many, many years, I would give much more effort and energy into what I thought I was doing well. So in my first marriage, I was a terrible husband. And I admit that. We got a beautiful daughter out of it. And my ex-wife and I remained good friends. In fact, her attorney said it was the nicest divorce he ever saw. I just wasn't. She was 19, I was 20. I don't know what the hell we were doing, but again, we got a nice daughter out of it, so maybe that was God's imagination. But I look back and I started teaching, just I guess 2 years after I got married, and about a year after my daughter was born, and it turned out I was, apparently anyway, really good at teaching. And really good in the academic world. And at committee meetings, people would say, "Oh, you're really good." And then I'd go home and be reminded of what a crappy husband I was. Now, it didn't. I was working on my doctorate. It didn't help that her parents didn't like me. But I don't blame them. I blame me for not facing it properly. So they were constantly reminding her that her ex-boyfriend already had a job and a career, and here I was still a student in college. So I do my bare minimum at home. And then I'd rush back to my job. And if there was reason to stay over, I'd stay over. And if there was, so I can understand, in fact, I can empathize with the temptation to follow your strengths and live for them rather than pausing and saying, I wonder if I should be working on my weaknesses a little more. Now, in time, I finally figured it out. I mean, it took, this is my third marriage, but I think it took. And so, what I do now, and part of it's my age, because I could retire if I wanted to. I'm 68, but 68 longest. I'm much more invested in my marriage, and if I had to quit Hopkins or quit the priesthood, well, I mean quit a particular church, because that was necessary to save my marriage, I wouldn't hesitate. But had that come up in my early years, I would have gone with my profession because I was much better at it. I would have said, well, if I have to walk away from something, I guess I'll walk away from what I'm not very good at anyway. And so I can imagine, not only imagine, I've met many people in public safety who have that kind of experience where they're really good at their job and very rewarding. And then they come home and the first thing that happens is their wife is scolding them for not being around enough or something like that. And they think, oh, brother. And of course, some of the stuff you go through. I remember when I was doing my chaplaincy, we were told, you're going to see a lot of stuff where you're really going to find it hard to talk to others who aren't part of this. So we have a community that you can speak with right here. They've all experienced it. They've all been by the side of people dying, what have you. Well, I mentioned this to Rebecca, my wife now. At this point, we were just dating. And she said, well, I want to be there for you. I want you to be able to tell me about it. I said, I don't think that's such a good idea. And no, we should be able to tell each other everything. Well, the time Rebecca was 35. So I came home one night from the hospital after a 12-hour shift. And she said, how did it go? And I said, oh, it was pretty sad. But remember, we agreed you would tell me. And I said, okay. there was a 35-year-old who died from pulmonary fibrosis, and I was there with her and her boyfriend as she was passing away, and she was pretty scared about the whole thing. Rebecca just broke into hysterics. 35, I'm 35. Oh my God. Okay, never mind. So I had to be a chaplain for a couple of more hours. But I learned, maybe that wasn't, but I could imagine under different circumstances walking away and saying, "Oh, to hell with this." I didn't want to do that because I love Rebecca and I didn't want to alienate her. But I could imagine in a weaker moment saying, "You know what, forget it. I'm just going to go out and hang out with my friends who understand this stuff." Yeah. So I can imagine that's an issue for people in those kinds of positions, because you can see some pretty horrendous stuff.
Absolutely. I think you nailed it. I've challenged myself and others to kind of identify what their core values are. And I think once you identify that, it removes the barriers to just focusing on the profession or just focusing on, like you said, what you're good at, because it forces you to zoom out a little bit and to put it through the frame of core values. And I think too many people hijack that too. They do the easy thing, like, oh, integrity, and everybody says integrity. Like, I want you to go deeper. Like, and you can't have 24 of them. Like, give me 5. Give me what truly matters, right? Like the core value list of 24 and like integrity and morality, and like they just use all the same buzzwords over and over. And like, no, go deeper, be more disciplined, be a little harder on yourself. Like, split hairs on this one because it matters. But I appreciate what you said. You're right. It is easy to do what you're good at, and then you can let everything else flounder. But the real work and real challenges is focusing on the things that, it's funny that will always be there, like the marriage and the kids and the personal life. Right. That's what you come home to. The work, somebody's going to fill your seat with another butt, once you leave, retire, resign. And I think that's something that's sitting with me a little bit more now, is that there's this book by Chase Jarvis. It's like, Don't Play It Safe. And I think
I've seen, I don't know the book, but yeah.
It was a phenomenal book. And I think now we get so aligned with, okay, we've got the pension and we've got the benefits, and I got to go to 30 years or 40 years, and I got to grind and get through this. And we get one shot at this whole thing, right? So go experience other things in life and in the world. And the place you come home to should be a bit of a sanctuary. And there's going to be hard times, but that should be a place of peace, and that's one of my core values, is peace. Like, there are going to be times when you're not happy, but you at least can still be at peace, and vice versa. So I appreciate what you said there. I know we're kind of humming, we're getting close to 90 minutes. So I want to start to get this wrapped up. There was one thing that you kind of mentioned just now with some humility, and I'll set it up like this. There's 2 things that really stuck with me when we were at Hopkins. And one was, it takes a lot of work sometimes to realize that you have your PhD, because it's not something that you wear on your sleeve. And I remember you telling a story of one of the only times you used the PhD designation was to help another student get into, I think, another school or something, right? Like you signed it PhD, Hopkins professor, and all this, because it wasn't something that you wanted to, necessarily put out there. And another thing that stuck with me was your disdain of the word utilize. You're like, why use it? Just say use. Why do you don't have to doctor it up and say utilize? Just use the word use. Don't make this fancier than it needs to be. But it was funny because I consider you incredibly wise, incredibly witty, highly intelligent, but you made things so logical and rational. And it's not, you have an impressive rap sheet, but it's not something that you necessarily wear on your sleeve as a look at me. And often in public safety circles, we talk about humility. And I think it is vastly important, as long as you don't think less of yourself, like the C.S. Lewis quote, right? So how do we find, kind of wrapping this up, in public safety leadership specifically, what does healthy humility look like, and how do we use that to our advantage?
Again, in very broad abstract terms, I'm going to invoke Aristotle again. You don't want to be falsely humble. If you're good at something, admit it and be grateful for it. But you also don't want to overstate. And so, a very simple mantra is, well, I could always do better, always. And I'm going to look for ways to do better. So if you can find that sweet spot where you're admitting honestly your talent and your value, this is a little bit like, this is going to sound like I'm blowing smoke, I think, but one of the things I would say to you and your profession, and also the police and what have you, one of the reasons for my apparent professional humility is the effects I have on my clients, quote unquote, like either my students or my congregants. I think they're good effects, and I think I'm there to offer them, but I don't have to make life or death decisions. I don't have to make decisions about constitutional rights and what have you. And so, yeah, you want to be a philosophy teacher, get a PhD, sure. It's your union card, but philosophy PhDs are no better than anybody else in terms of community service. And I think if I had a pick, I'd rather have public safety people in my neighborhood than another philosopher with a PhD. You may remember that the other time I used, so the one time you're remembering that I called myself doctor was a student who was having trouble getting her transcripts from another university. So she was and so I picked up the phone and said, "Hello, this is Dr. Dreisbach. May I speak to your registrar, please?" And I got right in where the student had been having trouble. The other time you may remember, and I think I stole this from Woody Allen, the night I was going out, the night I got my PhD, and I was taking my parents and my wife and daughter out, I made a reservation under the name Dr. Dreisbach, just for fun.
Yeah.
But Woody Allen has this scene in one of his movies where somebody has done that very proudly, but he's an English teacher, right? But he likes everybody to call him Dr. So-and-so. And all of a sudden the restaurant, somebody's having a heart attack. And the maitre d' comes over and says, Doctor, we've got, well, no, you don't, there's no time, come on over. And so here's this English professor standing over this dying guy, talking about death in the Middle Ages or something like that. And so I had this fear, that having been arrogant once, it was going to come and bite me in the butt. And there I'd be standing over some dying person saying, but what is death really? And so, as in the words of Winston Churchill, who was describing one of the public officials of his time, I think we PhD philosophers have a lot to be humble about. And so one doesn't want to overdo it. And so that's where I come from. Yeah, I'm glad I have a PhD and I enjoyed it, and I love my profession, but I couldn't save lives the way you do. And recently, about 2 weeks ago, I rolled out of bed while I was asleep and cracked my head on my nightstand. And within 3 minutes, there were some firefighters there, and within about 3 more minutes, the EMTs were there. And I was completely conscious. And in fact, I didn't even hurt, but there was blood spurting all over the place, and my wife was freaking out. So I was just chatting with them. And I really remember thinking at that moment, you're precisely the people I need. I don't need a philosophy professor to come in and sit next to me. And of course, they did their job very well. And they were very kind. They didn't have to be. They could have just been very businesslike. But and I thought, man, at that moment, there is nothing more important than what they're doing, right? So I would never presume to say that somehow my professional credentials make me better than anyone else. That would just be that would be arrogance undeserved. So thank you for your kind words. I appreciate that. And it's a reaffirmation of my choice of profession, and I appreciate that too. But I'm no better than anybody else. That's for sure.
Well, bringing it full circle to what you said early on was that we all have something to offer, right? So even within our own circles, yes, we hopefully can affect a lot of change and maybe save lives while we're doing it. And at the same time, the person that we saved, whether they're Well, I'll go as far as saying, when we were dealing with like the fentanyl epidemics, where I work, in the mid-Atlantic, we're kind of a hub for distribution for some really hard drugs. And you might run the same person a dozen times. And there'd be some people that would say, hey, if this person does die, we don't have to keep dealing with them. Or how many more times you're going to do this. That's not for us to decide. We're there to help and save lives and save the community. And that person, maybe it will be the 13th time that we save them. They have something to offer, and they're their own person with their own experiences. And so I think if we can take ourselves, slim down that ego a little bit and realize that everybody has something to offer. And once we get outside of our own circles, like we are no better than anybody else, just like you said, I think it creates a little bit more appreciation there. But
yeah. And but sometimes you have to remind yourself that you're no worse than anybody else. It's just your worst the list, right? And it's doing what you're called to do as best you can. And being honest with yourself about what your priorities are and perhaps what they should be. And the tools are there. I really think we're born at least with the seeds of those tools. And then, how much of this is nature and how much of it's nurture? There'll be dissertations written about that forever. Yeah. But they're there. And if we can help each other cultivate those tools, then I think we're doing the best we can. And it has to be done in community. I think that's an important point too.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
And so, somebody once, and I wear this as a badge of honor, somebody once accused me of malignant optimism. I thought that was a great line. And I really am. I think as long as we're still alive, there's always hope on this side of whatever there is on the other side. And no one of us can manage that by ourselves. So how do we help each other? And again, and here's where the Roman Catholic Church and I agree 100%. We start with the premise of the dignity of the person. That's the starting point. That whatever else happens afterward, it has to be based on the premise that the person before me has as much dignity as anybody and is as worthy of anybody of respect. And doesn't mean we shouldn't throw them in jail, and God forbid, it doesn't mean that we shouldn't kill them if we have to. I mean, I'm a pacifist in principle, but I'm not a Quaker pacifist. I think I'm sure I use this example in your class because I use it all the time. If my choice was to protect my daughter and kill the assailant, or let the assailant continue to hurt my daughter, I hope I'd have the courage to kill the assailant.
Yes.
Now, I think it's evil, but it's the lesser of two evils, right?
Absolutely.
And so, I can't remember where I was going with that, but the idea was always looking for the right path, but giving yourself permission to fail, because sometimes you've found yourself in a position where whatever you do next is technically a failure, and but you got to do something. And then sometimes I think forgiving ourselves is harder than forgiving others, which is an interesting predicament.
I certainly agree with that. Yeah. And within our profession for sure.
I bet. Yeah.
Yeah, we chain ourselves pretty quickly to some of the decisions or some of the incidents that we have, quite honestly, zero influence over. The end was already decided, and we can be incredibly hard on ourselves for that.
I bet. Yeah, I think I've seen examples of that. Yeah. My younger daughter, who's now a nurse, was EMT for a few years, and she had some stories to tell where I think she came away feeling like she could have done more when even everybody around her was saying, "No, you couldn't." No, you couldn't. Yeah. But she didn't quite believe them. She thought they were just trying to go easy on her. And I said, the mere fact that you chose to do this already wins you a lot of points. And you can't expect to be perfect at it. So you do your best. And again, the whole point about the dying. And I think my daughters both have kind of bought into my idea, which is about death, which is what I got from my dad. So I don't think they worried too much about death itself, but
good.
Yeah.
What you mentioned that was it malignant optimism? Is that how you said it?
Malignant optimism. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think this would be a great way to close this out. Two books, one of which I just recently read. There's Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, and
Yep,
then
that's a great one.
Yeah, and one I just read recently, The Happiest Man on Earth by Eddie Jacku. Also, a survivor, very much in the same vein as Viktor Frankl's book. Just talk about that finding opportunity for optimism, for happiness, put one foot in front of the other, even through the hardest experiences you may have in life. And you're going to be better set for life. Kind of what we talked about earlier, like not having that victim mentality and using it for PTS growth instead of, the disease or disorder side of things. But to close this out, if you were to recommend any reading, and I'll set it up with this, like your book, Ethics in Criminal Justice, that we used, I still have it. It's on the shelf. Just some of the arguments and points just transcend criminal justice. Like it has some neat narratives in there for life, and it's something that I've held on to. So that's cool. But
oh, thank you.
The stoicism, I think, has really ramped up again. I certainly enjoy reading it, and there's some modern day philosophers like Ryan Holiday that's really taking it by storm and really getting good information out there. But if you had some recommended reading for people in public safety, like if you have your own favorite book or top 2 or 3 things that you would recommend, what would they be?
First of all, I want to compliment you on all of this on the academic side of your life. It's really impressive. I guess, boy, what a terrific question. I would start with reading about the Nicomachean Ethics. I'm not sure if you're not familiar with ancient philosophy otherwise. Mm-hmm. You might not start with Nicomachean Ethics itself, but read about it and then read it. So that would be a book I would go to immediately.
Okay.
I would also recommend The Trial and Death of Socrates, which is really a set of 4 dialogues. Now, those are pretty approachable in themselves. I don't think someone would have to read the commentary. I think they could get right into those and pay very close attention to Socrates, who's the main character in those dialogues. I think if one has time, it's worth dipping into some of the religious texts, the Quran, what we call the Old Testament, of course, what Judaism calls its Bible, the Jewish Bible, the New Testament, some of the like the Upanishads and some of the stuff in Hinduism, and read about Buddhism. When I was in high school, if somebody had asked me that, the first book I would have gone to is the Tao Te Ching, which is by Lao Tzu. And so I think I would put that up. So, but you would ask for 3. So I'm going to say, I'm cheating a little. Nicomachean Ethics, Trial and Death of Socrates, Tao Te Ching. Those would be the 3 I'd start with. And then I would dip into some of the revered religious texts. But you'd need to have a commentary standing by as you were working through those.
Yeah, for sure. Which is largely what we did. I remember we really dug into the golden rule across all of the denominations, so to speak. And that was a discussion. I feel like I actually just cheated myself because I was in the bookstore yesterday and I had Trial and Death of Socrates in my hand. I'm not even kidding. I had 6 other books under my arm that I was getting ready to check out with at this used bookstore. I'm like, all right, I'm going to get this next time. And I put it back. And now I feel like I've cheated myself and I need to go back before somebody else grabs it.
Well, it sounds like you have plenty to read. And the good news is all of that stuff is available online for free if you don't mind an old translation. So if you Googled it, you'd probably get Benjamin Jowett's translation, which I think he did in 1900 or something, but it's fine. It's readable. So you don't actually have to buy it. You can get it you just get it online. But it sounds like you've got enough good books to read otherwise, so I don't want to discourage that.
I have the queue grows longer than what I'm actually able to read at once, but I'm okay with that. It's a good problem.
Oh, sure. I get that too. I've got about 15 books here that based on recommendations. And each time I get a good one, I buy it and then it sits. So I'll get to them eventually, God willing.
Yeah. Well, I say that I'm on a bit of a thank you tour because you are somebody that 15 years ago had a tremendous impact on me and my education. And I think at the time I knew how valuable it was, but I didn't realize the immensity of the value that it was bringing, because it's something that I have used throughout my career, and I think has even spun up now that I've gained hopefully maybe a little bit more wisdom and sense of my mortality, right? But you are one of those professors that I just brought incredible value, and the value and respect I have for you and the admiration from not just what we did in class, but then to also breaking bread over a beer at the end of the semester and doing everything in between. I apologize that it took 15 years for me to be able to articulate that as, till today, but I can't thank you enough for what you did for me 15 years ago and for sitting with me now for 90 minutes. It's just the value you bring, and in the most meaningful of ways and so easily approachable, I think, just can't be understated. So thank you for that. And I would absolutely love to have you back at some point. And next time you're in Baltimore, maybe we do need to grab a drink. I thank you so much. And like I said, you're doing so much good. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Well, you're doing a lot of good too. So we'll do a lot of good together.